human brain on the blockchain. Put your hands together for Dave Partner as he talks to us about the human brain on the blockchain. Put your hands together for Dave Partner, the Honorable Youth Leader of UR.
Good day, everyone. My name is Dave Partner. I'm a software engineer. Been a software engineer for many years. I'm a startup founder and a tutor online. So today I'm going to talk about a field of the blockchain that many people are not talking about yet. First of all, I will introduce a term called transhumanism. So some scientists believe that in the future, near future, they will be able to advance the human body so much that it will make sense that you don't call those kind of humans humans again. So they become sort of post-humans. A good example is if a man loses his leg, you could fix a prosthetic leg. That person becomes a cyborg. Anybody with a prosthetic leg is a cyborg. That's half human, half machine. What of heart pacemaker? So humans have been integrating machines into this physical body. And someday, scientists feel that they will get to a point where a person will look so different, so advanced than a regular human that they can no longer be classified as humans. Now, a subsection of this transhumanism is called digital humanism. So some scientists believe that in the near future, technology will advance to the point where some humans will exist only as softwares without any physical body. How is this possible? One way it is possible is that picture an old person, 99 years old, 100 years old. I don't know if you have seen somebody like that. Their brain is intact. Their mental faculties is intact, but their body is dying. Should we allow such a person to die? So these scientists believe that there will be technology that possibly you can put on the head of the person and scan the brain and put it on the internet. The person becomes a software, their body can die if it wants. That's digital humanism. And they estimate that there are billions of digital humans that exist in the future. We're just trying to make them come into existence. Now, let's imagine that this thing is true, that there are digital humans in the future. What problems would they face? The first biggest problem is if your mind is on the internet, you're exposed to virus attack. That's digital corruption. Somebody from the street here can hack Albert Einstein's mind, and now Albert Einstein is some Chukwuemeka Shegu. Now, how do we prevent that? There's only one way. It has to be on the blockchain. Blockchain has already largely solved the problem of hacking. Now, another problem such people would face is the problem of having their emotions fixed. Now, picture a scenario where we have built, somebody has written an algorithm that represents the human mind, and this guy is existing on the internet. He can chat with his family members, he can make phone calls, everything any human being can do, but it doesn't have a physical location. How do we store this person's emotions? It has to be on the blockchain, because we don't want the emotions changed or confused. What you felt yesterday, the level of happiness you felt yesterday is different from the ones you felt today. The level of curiosity, anger, and all those emotions. We have to take snapshots of it and attach it to your digital identity. We also have to save your memory. These are the things that collectively make up your consciousness. It should never be confused. It should never be hackable. This is blockchain. Currently, there are over 500 funded startups that are working on this now. Over 500. And one of them is the popular one by Elon Musk. That's the Neuralink startup. I don't know if you've heard of it. Bill Gates looked at it and was so convinced of the potentials of what Elon Musk is doing with the Neuralink that he invested $1 billion into it. And what is Musk doing? he wants to attach a device behind the human ear here, and then that device goes into your brain, and now it enhances things like your memory, your cognitive functions. Now you see things you will never forget. It enhances your processing capability. Now you can do math that you couldn't do before. And this is what they are already test running right now. So imagine what will happen in 10, 20 years' time. They are gradually fusing technology into the human brain. We are going to get to that point where, theoretically, the entirety of the human brain can be transmitted into technology. Now, is this even possible? A lot of people will argue against this, that human consciousness cannot be transmitted into something else. But the counter-argument is that consciousness is in levels. The consciousness a professor has over mathematics is different from the consciousness a 100-level student will have over the same mathematics. A professor can look at the same problem and see other dimensions of it. So, if we keep reducing it, we can see that the consciousness of an ant is different from the consciousness of a dog, different from the consciousness of a human. And I can tell you, based on that analogy, computers have already gained consciousness as we speak. Because you can pass values into them, they process it and give you back. They have memory also. The only problem is that their consciousness has not got to the point that we are talking about in this discussion. So let's analyze one or two of the most complex human functions and see whether, theoretically, is it even possible that computers can imitate that one day? Are humans the only living things that have emotions? That's a big question. Emotions are some of the most complex things that we do as humans. But then other animals have it. We know that dogs can be happy too. Dogs can be jealous. They can be angry. They can have rage. And a whole lot of things, including curiosity. The only difference is that ours is at a higher level. Now, how do you know that a dog is angry? You don't go into the brain of the dog to figure out whether the dog is angry. The way you know is by the external observation, the reaction of the dog. So if we get to a point where a computer is angry, how would we know? By looking at the algorithm? No. We're just going to observe what the computer is doing. So let's look at 3 emotions. And this is very controversial, but it calls for debate. That is love, like, and hate. If we can figure out a pseudocode, programmers know what pseudocode is. Basically, verbal descriptions of possible algorithms. If we can break these things down into pseudocode, then we can write codes in software that can do this. If we can write software that can imitate love, like, and hate, and other emotions, then it follows that someday we can scan the human brain and transmit it into a computer, and it will have those emotions too. So, here's a simplistic description. We have love, and many people think that hate is the opposite of love. No, it's just a solution. Like when your car breaks down, you change the tire. Changing the tire is not the opposite of a car moving. It's just a solution for when the car breaks down. So when a human being loves, not just a human being, any animal is in love, the brain of the person plots a triangle. In that triangle, the lover is at the top, mentally, all right? This is happening in the brain of the lover. And then the person they are loving is somewhere on the pyramid. Now, the person that is in love at the top owes a duty of protection and provision to the person they are loving, but then they believe that the person they love owes them a duty of loyalty. A good example, if you're walking on the road and somebody slaps you, you might take a step back and try to find out why they did that. But if you're walking with your mother and somebody slaps your mother, you go berserk. You don't care about the reason. Because what? You love your mother and you owe her a duty of protection. Now, let's reverse it. Imagine a daughter being wayward. That is disloyal to the father. What does the father do? The father tries to rescue the situation by cutting her off. That's when father say, I disown you. What is that disowning? That is, a section of that pyramid has exhibited disloyalty. Now the lover wants to destroy the pyramid. So he cuts the connection. Or he destroys the person that is disloyal, or he destroys himself. These are the three ways you can destroy the pyramid. So think of it in a real-life scenario. Somebody catches his wife cheating. What does he do? He tries to destroy the pyramid in either of these three ways. Either destroy the lover, destroy the connection, or destroy himself. This explains a lot of things about love, but not all. So now we can see the pseudocode. What happens if this happens? This is how this should react. If that happens, this is how it should react. That is pseudocode. Maybe somebody here can someday actually write the software code to reflect this. And remember, we don't have to look at the code to know whether the computer is in love. We watch the reaction. If your phone loves you today, how would you know? By looking at the Android code? No. It's by the reaction. Maybe it checks up on you. How are you doing? How is the event going? Just SMS, you reply. After some time, you can be convinced. Now, all these things, to an extent, there's a strong argument that it is possible. And that is why a lot of billionaires are investing in these cognitive technologies. And I believe that blockchain has a very big role to play in this. And then I'm going to close my speech today with just one quote about long life. Scientists have been trying so hard to extend the human life, and this is just one way that effort has been. Now, there's an age-long quote that says, "The earth is not our home. We're just travelers passing through." But the potentials of the future make me want to ask, are we still travelers passing through? If some way, someday, somehow, we figure out how to extend human life and stay here forever. Thank you very much.
Please put your hands together for Dave Partner again. Quite impressive, but I know that the things he talks about, if you follow him on Facebook, you know that, you know, your brain sometimes, you just close his page. You know, he has this funny word understanding about life, you know. But, you know, weird people make the world a better place in so many ways. So in the next 2 minutes, we'll be starting the next session, the next panel session. And in this panel session, we'll be looking at the legal and trust issues in the emerging world of dynamic NFTs, smart contracts, and the metaverse. Again, legal and trust issues. While the first panel was on, they were touching a little bit on legality. But now, the lawyers in the house will do justice by explaining very well the legalities and trust issues that are associated with NFTs, in the emerging world of dynamic NFTs, smart contracts. Because look at the word dynamic NFTs. Dynamic NFTs. We're not talking about mere JPEGs. We're talking about NFTs that have the capacity to change when some conditions are met. Now, the thesis that covers this panel says that the panel will focus on the legal and trust issues of the emerging unique asset class of dynamic NFTs, smart contracts, and so on. We have two of our panelists that will be joining us virtually, and the rest are here on ground. Please, Shen, can you connect, make sure that the panelists that are joining us virtually are ready to join. So let's put our hands together for Buki Ogunsaki. He's a lawyer, a blockchain lawyer, a researcher with a strong focus on IPs and digital properties. Put your hands together for Miss Buki, Mrs. Buki, as she comes up. The next up is Mr. Kwe Barino. Kwe Barino is the head of legal at Blockchain Nigeria. He's a group. He's also a blockchain lawyer, well versed in understanding the legalities of whatever you are doing in the industry. You need lawyers. You need lawyers. Someone will go to jail if you don't talk to lawyers now. Because when you steal somebody's work and go and put it on the internet, remember this one na blockchain, it will not forget. 30 years later, they will just look transaction and say it's you. Now so you say they're carrying you to where you don't know. All right, and the next person that is coming is my good friend Davison Oturu, also a seasoned IP intellectual property lawyer. Put your hands for Davison as he comes up. Then joining us virtually, we have Sarah Malik. Sarah Malik is an award-winning lawyer. She practices in the UK and the United States, in UAE regions of the world. Fantastic lady. You need to put your hands together for them. I can see them online. Hi, Sarah. Hi. Then we have also Nicola Rement, also a lawyer. Both of them work at Soul International. That's a legal firm. They will talk to us about what they do at Soul. Put your hands together for Nico Rement. Thank you so much. Now, this panel session will be coordinated and moderated by Mr. Barino Kwe. Paul.
I think I already have a mic here. So, I should move away. I think I would like to stay this way so I can also see Nicole and Sarah. Okay, so it's afternoon, right? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the conference once again. Today, just like Mr. Chuta said, we'll be speaking. This particular panel will be addressing the issue around trust, legality, as it concerns NFTs, the metaverse, and crypto in general. So today, we are just going to go straight to the point without much ado. We already have our panelists introduced to us, so go straight to the point. So my first question for today will go to Madam Buki, Mrs. Buki. So it's about making clarification. It's introductory, because for us to be able to know how the legality and trust applies to the metaverse and NFTs, we have to first of all understand what legality and trust entails. And so Mrs. Buki will give us a clarification on what legality and trust entails, and if there are any difference or similarities between the two terms. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, BNUG. It's awesome to be here today. It's an honor and a privilege. So when it comes to legality and trust, legality, as we know, would rely on regulations that we have, while trust is the base for this new system, decentralized system, where it is trustless. So you don't necessarily need to know another party before dealing with them or entering into a contract with them. Trust does not need to play a role. Whereas the other way around, when it comes to traditional legality, trust plays an important role. And we need to entrench that law, that trust in regulations. So when it comes to legality is law, and when it comes to trust on the blockchain and with blockchain technology, it definitely does not need to be there, which is the reason why we have things like smart contracts, which are Turing complete. They complete without parties even knowing each other, or even jurisdiction is out of the question, because I could be in Lagos and the person that I'm transacting with, could be in Cyprus. We don't need to see each other. We don't need to have had previous dealings. We don't even need to have people that know each other or any single contract. The only contract binding us will be the smart contract. And once we enter the terms into the contract itself, it is fully automated and doesn't need that trust element. So I think those are the two contradicting aspects of legality and trust. Do they have things in common? Definitely smart contracts are still legal, but then when it comes to unforeseeable circumstances that the smart contract is not able to tell, what happens in situations like that? And I think that's why we're here today, to discuss such things. How do we address situations where unforeseeable circumstances come into the picture? How are we able to regulate that aspect, of blockchain technology?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Buki, for that. The next question will go to Nicola. I believe you can unmute yourself. So the question requires you to give an overview of key legal cases involving the metaverse.
Oh, I think that's for Sarah.
Oh, that's for Sarah? Okay. So Sarah, can you take that? Apologies.
Yeah. Okay, we can both deal with it. Firstly, thank you for inviting us. We're super honoured to be part of this, and we're really sorry we can't be there in person, and hopefully next time we will. Please also excuse if you can't hear properly, because we're in a hotel and there's background music. We've just come off another panel, but we very much want to be part of this. So Nicola will address you on what the actual legal issues in the metaverse and the general kind of hot topics that are emerging. But from my perspective, I just want to touch on a couple of the issues, on a couple of the cases that are hot in the metaverse. And it's not any surprise that they're all to do with IP and trademark and what is the actual asset of the NFT, and is that artistic, or is it ripping off a trademark, or is it any kind of infringement? So most of you, I think, will be aware that in January of this year there was a trademark lawsuit filed against Nathan Rothschild by Hermes, because they decided to sell 100, and those of you in the audience who are ladies and have Birkins, and those of you in gentlemen should be buying those Birkins for the ladies, 100 Birkin NFTs were put out, and each of those NFTs were sold for about 1.5 Ethereum, and obviously the price is skyrocketed. And Birkin obviously took umbrage with this and brought claims of trademark infringement, and they basically said that what they're trying to do is a rip-off, if you like, the Birkin brand by putting the word meta before it, referring to virtual worlds, economies where digital assets like NFTs can be sold. There was Rothschild pushed to have a dismissal of the lawsuit, and what they argued was, look, we're not trying to be Birkin, we're not trying to mislead the public. Basically, all we're doing is artistically relevant. That's what we're doing. It's artistic work, and we're not misleading anybody about their source or content. So they said we're protected as artistic expressions under the First Amendment. The judge, one of the judges of the US District Court said, no, that doesn't ride. And he said there is an artistic aspect to the image, but nonetheless there are sufficient allegations to be made that their use of meta Birkins is not artistically relevant. There's allegations that the misleading aspect is something that needs to be dealt with. So most of the cases that are emanating in the kind of virtual world, and there's another one you know about Nike and StockX, are all to do with the NFTs being sold and what rights the original kind of manufacturer or company or otherwise has over that, and whether it's being misled. So with the Nike and StockX, which is February 2021, Nike filed a suit against StockX, saying that StockX is a Detroit-based marketplace. Trademark infringement, dilution, unfair competition, the usual that's thrown at it. And they're saying you're offering these NFT images as physical versions, if you like, of the Nike footwear, but you don't have authorization to do that. And they're saying that you're selling these at heavily inflated prices. Customers who are buying them don't know that there's absolutely no correlation or relationship between, us and you, and therefore you're not authorized. They're all kind of IP trademark infringement rights. There's a separate kind of conversation to be had, and we spoke about it at the ICC in Lagos in June, about the whole rules that apply to disputing in the metaverse, whether it's the arbitration rules that are used to use or whether the metaverse arbitration rules. But Nikki, when she gives her bit, will talk about the general issues that arise legally in the metaverse. But certainly from our side, and there's a few of the test cases because we don't know which way they're going to go. And it's really an exciting place to be in because it's so new. But we watch with interest. I mean, there are other matters as well that are in the metaverse: Rockefeller, Damon Dash, Miramax, Quentin Tarantino, film rights. But they're all to do with IP, infringement, trademark. Do they have the right to have these NFTs, selling these NFTs? Are they artistic? Are they trying to mislead the customer? So we watch with anticipation of how these matters will actually be dealt with, because it's all new law. There's no precedent, there's no established law, there's no kind of jurisdiction that is being used. So we watch with interest. But thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
Nikki. You guys
Thank you for that. Miss Sarah, in her response, actually made reference to issues of trademark as it regards intellectual property. Mr. Davison, in your view, do you think the current regime on copyright intellectual property can adequately address issues around the metaverse and NFT, or there is a need for the creation of new regimes to specifically, spatially address intellectual right issues around metaverse and NFTs?
All right, thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. So I would say it's going to be a bit difficult and, expensive to try and create special laws for the metaverse, because at the end of the day, really, the metaverse is exciting, it's interesting, but it's just one aspect of development, right? I'm actually part of a committee right now set up by some international bodies where we're looking at IP in space, because similar to the metaverse, you're having people now looking to go to space and set up factories, set up things. People will buy and sell and trade, and so the possibility of infringements taking place is also quite, ripe for space as well. And what we looked at doing was, rather than, trying to have special laws per se, we're looking at existing laws, around space law, around IP laws, and seeing how we can find a level of uniformity across them. So when it comes to the metaverse, already you have IP laws that they may not be comprehensive in themselves, but by extending their applicability, right, you can actually find protection, which is what is happening in some of these cases that were mentioned earlier on. If you look at even Nigeria's trademark laws, for instance, even though it is a Trademark Act of 1967, but within those laws, you can find ways of being able to protect your IP in the metaverse. Can it be stronger? Yes, but it's going to be quite a lot, because each country has its own IP law and they are territorial. So if I protect my NFT in Ghana, for instance, it doesn't mean that it's protected in Nigeria. So while I may protect it in Ghana, I can go to Singapore and register that same NFT for somebody else. So those are the challenges you would find. So yeah, it's just going to be very, very difficult and expensive to set up something completely different from what already exists. But I think using existing laws like the Madrid Protocol filing system, which allows you to get protection across over 100 countries, and a few other regional filing systems. If you file on the classes that allows you protection for the internet, produced goods and services, you can then find protection for your NFTs in the metaverse there.
Okay, thank you very much. In other words, the current regimes on intellectual property can be made applicable to NFTs and the metaverse, maybe with a little of amendment or judicial pronouncement here and there.
Yes, they may not be robust enough, but using what we have, you can find protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davidson. So, Nicola will finally come to you. So, what are the most important legal considerations for anyone who has a business or is setting up their business in the space? How can legal issues be avoided?
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if you heard me just now. I just wanted to thank you all very much for having us. As Sarah already said, next time hopefully we'll be there in person, and obviously we'd love to also welcome you in Dubai. So of course we understand that when you're starting a business, there are other costs that you need to worry about, and usually setting up the business and getting it running is more important than wanting to spend a lot of money on legal fees, and there is obviously a reluctance in spending on legal fees. However, just make sure that when you do set up your business, especially in this space, make sure that your reluctance doesn't cost you a whole lot of money further down the line. So be proactive and not reactive. Get your foundations right, not only on the legal side. I mean, just in general, get your foundations right from the beginning. It's very important and maybe worth getting a lawyer involved for. It may also be worth investing in a lawyer to draft important agreements. So if you're looking at IP right agreements, copyright agreements, partnership, safe agreements, all of these things, make sure that they are actually done right from the beginning. Also, make sure that if you have property or a product, that it is trademarked or that you're filing it correctly. When it comes to ownership of property, for example, you see now Nike's filed, I think, was it early this year, seven applications. Victoria's Secret filed for applications this year. McDonald's filed for trademark applications all around food and beverages. I think Victoria's Secret was all about virtual clothing collections. So it's really important to make sure that you protect what you're also building. And you have to file them in time, especially, for example, if you look at US trademarks, it can take up to a year to get a trademark filed. So it really is important to get these done earlier rather than later, because you can just end up in like a lot of a legal mess when you don't do this correctly. It should also be noted that with virtual items, there's always a difference between the virtual property and the ownership of the virtual property and the ownership of the digital, of the physical item. So that ownership may actually lie with different people. So be aware of what you actually want and how you structure yourself within the space. Also, when looking at regulations and compliance are rapidly changing in the jurisdictions all around the world. So when it comes to that, it's quite important to be on top of any applicable regulatory and compliance matters. Don't just assume you're aware of regulations that you're supposed to be aware of, but actually get yourself some advice in the jurisdiction that you're operating in or want to be operating in, and have somebody stay on top of it. Because these are things that can cost you a lot in the end. So I'm not saying I am a lawyer, like, go spend money on lawyers. Don't spend money on super expensive lawyers, and don't think that all your money needs to go to legal fees. But I think it is important to get certain legal aspects right from the beginning, and that will actually save you money probably further down the line. So don't see it as a cost, but rather as an investment. And also, if you look at legal contracts, it's also important that they are drafted the way they work for you, and they capture everything that you actually need. So it is always good to have somebody there who either drafts it or just has a look at it for you to make sure that everything is captured. So yeah, have someone who's on top of all your regulatory and compliance developments because the heftiest fines come if you deal with like non-compliance issues. So yeah, you also end up spending lots of money down the line if you have poorly drafted agreements that result in disputes, or as Sarah already mentioned, there's so many issues around IP rights and ownership. So if you can avoid, or at least avoid to some extent, these issues by getting lawyers in at an early stage. Because it's really no point in having the best product or the fanciest newest technology if you haven't actually protected yourself. So ensure you are protected, your business is protected, your product is protected, get yourself everything set up properly from the outside and really stay on top of it throughout the process of setting up. Because legal issues that can arise are obviously, like I already mentioned, contract disputes, IP right protection and privacy matters, ownership of property disputes, and you probably also want to have lawyers involved when you're creating, for example, when you're creating an NFT, and you want to ensure that you know what IP rights and ownership rights you're actually keeping and what you're actually giving away. So I think this is just a brief rundown of what issues can arise, and I guess also how you can avoid them.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Nicola, for that. Talking about getting lawyers involved in your project or company as a blockchain or as a transaction, as a party in a transaction that is being carried out on the blockchain. We have the smart contract, which at the early stage of the smart contract, it was touted that the smart contract would actually do away with the need for lawyers, as parties can now transact with each other in a trustless environment using smart contract without any need of an external or a third party to enforce it. So, Madam Buki, do you really think a smart contract can do without a legal application, or how can you match both a smart contract and when it comes to compliance with legalities? Thank you.
All right. I always get to answer this question, and I love it very much, because many people think that because the system is decentralized, so suddenly you don't need lawyers anymore. I don't think that is the case. It's not the case, actually. For instance, when it comes to NFTs, there are certain processes that need to be embarked upon before embarking on an NFT project. Contracts need to be drawn. You are going to have partners. There's going to be copyright. There's going to be intellectual property. You probably need to even have an agreement or a link to an agreement in the metadata of your NFT. Otherwise, you are not, entirely protected. There are so many other aspects. When it comes to property as well, digital land, you need to have proper contracts in place. When it comes to music, the entire production may not be completely yours. So you need to have artist releases signed. You need to have music production agreements. There's so many things that need to be in place prior to launching your music NFT. So there are many aspects that a lawyer will still play very significant role in your smart contracts. Again, I mentioned earlier that smart contracts don't entirely cover unforeseen circumstances. So what happens, in a situation where there's an unforeseen circumstance? I'll give an example. There's this Indian case of an owner of a Bored Ape, and I believe that he used the Bored Ape to get a loan from either NFTFi or one of these other DeFi loan organizations. But then he had drafted an agreement which was included in the IPFS file of the NFT, that under no circumstances would the Bored Ape be sold. So even though he was giving the Bored Ape to the company as collateral to get a loan, he received the loan, and in the terms of the loan, it stated that where he defaulted, there would be a dispute resolution arbitration process to get the funds back, or they would give him I think the clause that he added in the agreement was that under no circumstance would he lose ownership of the Bored Ape, that he could either rent it out or there will be other options available to him than for them to sell. So when he defaulted on his loan, what happened was that the company went ahead and placed the Bored Ape on OpenSea for sale because he had defaulted on the loan. But because he had the agreement in place, he took them to court, and the court ruled that because there was an agreement that specifically stated that the Bored Ape could not be sold, there needed to be other options that were available to him apart from that. And he won the case. So you can see that in that particular circumstance, he was protected by law and was able to even retrieve his ownership back under the law, in India. So there's no doing away with lawyers, unfortunately, in this circumstance. The technology may be new, but like David had even alluded to earlier, that traditional laws will still take place. We will still fall back on traditional laws. The only thing now is that we just need to extend that applicability of the laws. So I think, in all the circumstances of those of us here who are embarking on, DLT or blockchain or NFT or metaverse projects, we need to ensure that all those agreements are in place and we comply with the relevant law, that applies to that section or that particular project.
Let me add something there as well, and thank you, Buki, very expansive. And I think one thing that the developers and the innovators need to realize is, because sometimes this convo keeps coming up around the roles of lawyers within this ecosystem. The truth of the matter is, we may be lawyers, but we pretty much understand the technology, right? And what we're trying to do is to safeguard most of these things for the ecosystem at the end of the day. Now, the smart contract is amazing, it's fantastic, but there are still other legal principles that would come into play in order for even that smart contract to be enforceable or be regarded as being valid. There's for instance, when it comes to capacity, right? A minor cannot execute a contract, right? If a minor decides to execute a contract, it's void, which means it cannot be enforced. So while you may enter into the smart contract with a minor or an illiterate, for instance, those are not enforceable contracts. So you end up losing at the end of the day. But it's only a lawyer that will be able to tell you, well, okay, now the lawyer is letting you know anyway, but then there are other things too that the lawyer may not tell you. But it's lawyers that may be able to read between the lines and, advise you on what needs to be done. So I think it's important because even before our session came up, we were speaking with the artist on the NFT, and he was saying how expensive lawyers can be. And maybe it's not held by the fact that some lawyers wear expensive suits, but I think it still matters, to get the right type of guidance when you're back in this sort of thing. So smart contracts, fantastic, amazing, but they can't do it with lawyers at the end of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Though the next question will still come back to you, but while he takes the next question, we'll be opening the floor to questions. We'll be open to questions from the floor after his response to this particular question. While responding to the last question, you made a whole lot of reference to the fact that the current existing law, though it was in relation to intellectual property, I believe as well, you could also hold the view that even existing laws in other areas can as well apply to different aspects of the blockchain, of metaverse, and of NFT. What, in your view, do you think should be the proper approach on the part of regulators when it comes to regulating activities and the transaction around the blockchain? Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty easy one, and I think anybody in the room will say the approach should be that of collaboration. For a long time, the government authorities and the regulators have had that approach of seemingly stifling innovation, right? And you can understand it sometimes because think of it as your own business, right? If there are set rules and regulations and then somebody just starts to create another type of thing somewhere, you'll be worried, you'll be concerned. You know, if the law says you can't move along this place, but then somebody says, but there's freedom of movement, so I have to move, then there'll be a problem. So I think the regulators need to understand the technology. They need to understand how the innovators will always be ahead and then find ways that they can collaborate and understand them. The Central Bank of Nigeria is one example, and we're all familiar with what they've done and how they clamped down on a couple of things. But that hasn't solved what they perceived was the problem. Because it may shock you at the myriad of issues that the Central Bank of Nigeria took into consideration when they were carrying out that ban. They were thinking about the falling prices of the naira, the exchange rate, but it's worse than it was then. They wanted to introduce e-naira, but I don't know what the adoption is now. You know, so rather than being suspicious of these things, they need to be able to embrace it and find how it can work. In the US, for instance, they've looked at ways of taxing, you know, these things, and they can actually be taxed in Nigeria because it's property, right? So you can tax it, and you can make revenue out of that. You know, so the SEC is trying for what it is. They have their rules now, though they are not operational yet. I believe when they become operational, it will allow more engagements, right, and probably open things more within the ecosystem. But I think collaboration is probably the only way to go at the end of the day.
Okay, I just wanted to add that many times I don't think regulators understand this space. So they need to understand what is going on there in order to know what needs to be regulated. Now, there are millions of people roaming around in this digital virtual world, doing different things that the government doesn't even know about. And I wanted to just emphasize, usually when we're talking of the metaverse, we talk about trademark laws, copyright laws, we talk about privacy, data privacy and all, but there are also criminal laws that need to come into place. There are also corporate laws that need to come into place because now we find that corporations like Meta are the ones that are designing the rules and the regulations for the metaverse because we don't have regulators in that space. And we have to make sure that regulators come into the place because when a corporate body is the one dictating the rules, there's a balance of interest that may not be in favor of public interest. Because if you are trying to balance public interest and corporate interest or profit, making profit, it doesn't exactly balance out. So that's where you need regulators in the space, you know, for guidelines and frameworks so that many things are not escaped. I also want to mention the aspect of digital identity. I can be me here, but in the metaverse, I could be two different people. You know, I was mentioning to somebody earlier that one of my characters could be a criminal element, and the second one could be my real person. How do we trace the criminal elements in the metaverse or in this virtual space, you know, or social economy that we call the metaverse? Because there are people that are actually living and working in the metaverse on a daily basis. So it's important that regulators come into this place space to regulate and give proper guidelines and frameworks for people for users and for organizations. So we're talking not just privacy, we're talking corporate law as well, criminal laws as well. You know, there are various aspects, you know, that we could plug into the metaverse.
Why would you want to be a criminal in the metaverse?
Well, maybe not criminal, but doing illegal things.
Multiple person disorder. Okay, so we'll be taking questions from the floor now. I think we've seen that hand for a while. Please, the mic. Is it the mic? The guy behind with the white sleeve. You introduce yourself. Sir, this way. No, the guy behind. Him first. His hand has been up for a while. All right, so just a brief introduction of yourself, your question, and if you are directing it to a specific person, you can also...
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah,
My name is Tito Fumi. I'm a lawyer. My question is to Mr. Davison and also Ms. Ogunshakin. So smart contracts here, are there for issues of unfair terms? Because they are basically like standard e-commerce contracts, boilerplate contracts, take it or leave it. There's a higher bargaining, there's literally no bargaining power for the terms in the contract. How do we bridge this lacuna? Because I am the tech guy. I've imputed what's supposed to be in the smart contract. You are the consumer. There's no bargaining power for the consumer to decide what terms should favor him in the smart contract. So how do we bridge this lacuna in relation to smart contracts and e-commerce contracts generally?
Well, so I think the scenario that you've painted, right, and I don't know if I'm getting you right, but the scenario that you've painted, you could pretty much find it in any normal contract, not necessarily the smart contract. You may still have unfair terms at the end of the day, because if the developer has his terms and you have your conception of what it should be, then you still find yourself in that same place where you will be, regardless of whether it was a smart contract or a normal contract. So I don't think it changes, the complexion of the transaction that you're looking to carry out, unless if you're thinking along the lines that maybe parties should have had the opportunity to negotiate before you reach, that contract. But since you would pretty much be aware of the terms before you decide to go into it anyway, then I really don't know whether there's any avenue for you to try and vary what is already embedded in the smart contract, because it's self-executing in itself. So there really is, it's just what it is, I don't know if I got you right.
So the lacuna exactly is where the issue is, mainly with smart contracts. How do you govern the developers who are, coding the contracts? That's where, we were talking about regulators entering into the space and beginning to regulate in a different way. To also address the lacuna, there's what we call decentralized justice. So we actually have courts and arbitration systems that are in the decentralized space. So we have like the likes of Aragon, we have Kleros, where, once the platform or blockchain layer is plugged into their system, they will be the ones to hear the matters and resolve the disputes. So they will create a new smart contract and put the old smart contract into it, and then now hand it over to the court system. So once the court system gives their verdict, the new smart contract will take over and implement, whatever the judgment is. So I think that's one solution on one end. And then we have the other solution where regulators need to come into the space and begin to give certain guidelines and give corporate organizations and developers and people who are developing these smart contracts, give them restrictions, that they need to abide by.
In other words, what you're saying is that there's need for every smart contract to have an arbitration clause embedded in it?
They can have arbitration clauses, but what we now have is for you to have a smart contract on a particular blockchain, that particular blockchain must be subscribed to a decentralized justice system.
Okay, good. Okay, so the mic. Okay, please.
My name is Faridat, a law student from University of Lagos. I'll be asking the lawyer in white suit first. Sir, in school...
White suit?
Sir, in school, I learned that to every rule there is an exception. So when you were mentioning the capacity of contract, so something came to my mind that, okay, in blockchain, regarding capacity of contracts, do we have exceptions? while dealing with NFT or in the metaverse world, regarding capacity of contract, is there any exception to it? I want to ask you that. Then my second question goes to the beautiful madam. I want to ask if there is any specific documented regulations regarding blockchain, and if there is any, how can we assess them, or anyone that you have idea of, so that we can tap from your knowledge, ma'am. So those are my two questions.
All right. Thank you. I was wondering if there was someone else somewhere with a difference. Okay, well, so in terms of exemptions, I would say no, because you see, the principles are the same, and that's why, they are smart contracts, right? But they are contracts at the end of the day. So offer, acceptance, consideration, intention to enter into legal relations, consensus added them. Those are what you would look at to determine whether a contract has come into existence in the first place. Then you now start looking at the other factors as well, that would crystallize that contract. Because like I said, while you may have these elements of a contract, which means that it is binding and will typically be enforceable, there will be other things you need to take into consideration, things like misrepresentation, mistake as well. All of those have to be taken into consideration. So exemptions would then raise questions as to the validity of the smart contract at the end of the day.
In addition to what he just said, concerning your exemption, of course, we have the about capacity. We have the issue of a next friend. Let's say the person is mentally deranged or the person is a minor. The person can actually enter a valid contract through his or her next friend. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. Madam.
So with regards to regulations, in Nigeria, we don't have, the only regulation that we have so far is the SEC rules for virtual asset service providers. So you can download that online. Globally, you can take a look at the SEC rules in the US, CFTC, how we test to know whether an NFT is a security or whether it's just a regular asset. You can also take a look at MICA in Europe, MICA. You can take a look at their rules. Although it doesn't cover NFTs, it covers most crypto assets. Then I think Dubai also has their regulation for their crypto regulation as well. So you can also Google that and read through the processes of getting licenses in Dubai. So there are a few here and there that, once you, Google is your friend. Once you go online, you'll be able to get, but I think that's a good summary of the major ones that are being worked on.
Hello? Give him. Hello? No, him first. Give it to him. No, not him. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Iken Namadi. I'm a lawyer too. My question actually goes straight to what was discussed, I think, in the last session about copyright. And I think I'm directing it to my learned friend at Devins. So, the gentleman talked about open AI. That is a situation where the AI can, create arts. The foundation was that actually they don't really create like original art. They learn. That's things they learn from arts that are already in existence. So the question I'm asking, where the AI picks maybe part of the art that is already existing and picks from another one and now creates a new art, who actually do you give the copyright to? That's my question. Who owns the art?
Okay, well...
The intellectual property.
Yeah, so just to simplify that, at the end of the day, only living beings can own intellectual property. At least that's the state of our law now. So copyright can only be owned by a person. It can't be owned by AI. It cannot be owned by a monkey or by anything else other than the human being. So in that kind of situation, it will be in the best interest of the person creating the NFT to ensure that the AI is not infringing on already existing intellectual property. Because if it does that, then that individual who decides to publish it will be held liable for copyright infringement and other types of IP infringements you can probably find inside what has been created. Does that answer your...
Also, to add to that, with regards AI, just like what Davidson, said, you could, if you use works that belong to other people, just like he said, you could be held liable, and not just one individual now. It could be either individually, jointly, or severally. So there could be a couple of individuals that are held liable for the AI or for the AI algorithm. So creating or coding AI algorithm or using AI does not absolve you of any responsibility. In fact, it even increases your liability in that particular circumstance.
So, in other words, it depends on how unique the art that is created comes out. So please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is a misconception about what smart contracts are. And I know that lawyers have been asking the questions. But by the very definition of smart contracts, it takes a human being out of the equation. So when you had the situation where somebody in India used an NFT that was supposed not to be sold, you are not dealing... Now, there are two things. There's an entity and then there's a smart... By that definition of smart contract, it's code. And by entering into that smart contract, it means that it is enforceable whether you like it or not. Secondly, there are things called oracles. Now, if I go into a bet with you, for instance, in the real world, if I say, let's bet who's going to win the Champions League, and you say Man U, and I say maybe Liverpool, for instance. Now, in the real world, you could renege and we'll go to court. Now, if we put it on a smart contract, we will code oracles, and in the oracle, we'll have programmed that we're going to get the results from these websites, BBC, this, and then they'll feed into it, and then whatever happens, if I bet $1,000, automatically, whoever wins, the contract will execute in such a way that it will give, there is no recourse, there is no legal, there is no human being in there. So my own is, how are we bringing humans into what code is supposed to be doing?
Okay, so again, smart contracts we already know are Turing complete. They are fully automated, just the way you said it. But what happens when it has completed the transaction and there's a dispute? What happens in that circumstance? There could be a dispute because we are humans, unfortunately. The people who are behind the smart contracts are humans. So, for instance, let's give an example, right? Let's say I commissioned someone to design a website and we encode it in a smart contract. And the contract is fully automated and complete once the website has been done. What if I don't like the website? What if it's not?
No, so
you
there
understand?
will be rules written in the smart contract to say, I will only pay this person if he's completed the home page, the About Us page, that's why the oracles are there. So they will go and check to see if, and once that thing is done, itself, that's why it's Turing complete. If you look at it from, that's why banks don't really like cryptocurrency. Because it means that you are taking an entire financial system out. If I can relate that, it's like cash. If I give you cash right now, it leaves me, it becomes a bearer instrument unto you. There is no settlement, there is no clearing, there is no, reconciliation. That's the same way smart contract works. But it is on the blockchain and is executed by code. There is no human interaction.
Doc, I think the only aspect we are having issues with is We already agree it's fully automated. We already agree it's completed. But we're just talking about the percentage of unforeseen circumstances that may arise from that smart contract transaction. That little bit, that exception is where we're talking about.
So this is why sometimes there's that joke that how many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb now? Because you have to now decide how many. So we agree with you completely, and I'm not sure that, we're looking at those situations that can arise, and I'll give you, because you see, it is when cases happen that we now say that there is precedent, and it is based on that precedent that you will now be able to explore the theory that you've been expounding. There's a case of, I think it's B2C2 versus Cunha, where there was a smart contract, but there was an error in the code that said, I think the person was supposed to be paid, I think 250 times more than what he was supposed to get. And because it was so it went like that. And the person now raised the legal principle of mistake. Because you see, like we've been saying, there are elements you have to consider for contracts. Where there's a mistake, where both parties were not thinking along the same lines, but it ended up that I was thinking of selling a car, you were thinking about selling a donkey, because we were talking about mobile, something that you can move it. At the end of the day, I bring a donkey, you don't like, so they went to court or to arbitration. I can't remember which one now. And it was actually decided in favor of the other party. Yes, that it had already been encoded, even though it was an error. So the principle of mistake could not avail the person who paid 250 times more. Do you get what I'm saying? So that principle still needed to be tested as to whether that was a circumstance that could change what would naturally be executed by virtue of it being a smart contract.
Now, what I want to say is,
sir.
if that was possible, it means that all smart contract hacks would be taken to court, but not one. So if, for instance, you hear of all these hack attacks on smart contracts, where somebody hacked a smart contract and was able to siphon money, they never take them to court. What they do is they simply write all the exchanges, and somehow they block the address, the wallet address of whoever has done that hack. They don't take them to court. So in my own opinion, I think perhaps lawyers are just looking for a way to sort of insert themselves
to make money out of it.
So basically what is there is...
That's basically what he was trying to say.
Basically what is there is that you might not really understand these things.
Yes.
You might not really understand these things because, like Mrs. Buki said initially, the law doesn't interfere with the smart contract. There is freedom, of course, for party to reach contract, but there are certain transactions that have certain terms that needs to be met for the contract to be valid. And in some instances, you might enter an agreement with someone. Like, for instance, if you enter an agreement with an employee, it doesn't even matter whether the employee signed the document or not. There are situations where the court can upturn that document despite the fact that you both agreed to the terms in the contract of employment. Various terms of relationship and transaction has their unique kind of law or regulation guiding them. So smart contract is not an all-in-all. After it has been executed, after it can be executed, it's still humans that actually, let's say for instance, if money is sent to a wallet, or if a particular wallet, there is someone that has the private key to those wallets, and that person is still under the normal legal system. And if a dispute arises and they go to court, the court can still upturn it. And if the court upturns it or gives a verdict, you have no option than to obey. It's not about how you feel. It is what it is. I would like to go online to see if Nicole and Sarah has something to contribute to this issue, because
we're
it's
not here
very...
to collect your money. Don't worry. It's not your money that we're after.
No. Okay, so let's Nicola, I don't know if you have something to say about this particular issue.
happens, another thing gets executed, right? However, if you look at legal contracts, there are a lot of other things that come into play, right? There's so many more vague things that a smart contract in itself cannot capture. Even if you look at an arbitration clause, it still needs a human involved afterwards. So I really do think, yes, I understand a basic smart contract may not need a lawyer, but as soon as a structure becomes more complex and more parties become involved, lawyers are there to figure out how to protect every party, right? And this is something that a smart contract in itself is not able to do.
All right, thank you, Nicola. Sarah, do you have something to say as well?
Well, I agree with what's been said, and I fully understand in the space that, it's all automated, why do we need, human intervention, that's the thought process, that's the whole new world, that's what all this kind of digitization is. But even issues were asked, I think, just kind of narrowing this back to the previous question of capacity and otherwise, are we going to, there are exceptions. There are certain traditional dichotomies of law that will follow through whatever the process is, automated or not, and you can't divorce yourself from that. So it's correct that the smart contract per se might not need that kind of human intervention, but in terms of the legalistics and what happens, you can't get away from that. I think we're still a long way away yet from a world where you can completely do away. And it's not, there's a misconception about lawyers. We don't want to just jump in just to jump in. That's not smart lawyering. Forgive the pun. But there is a space for it, and it's about understanding what value that person will add. So I'm going to disagree. I'm going to agree to the extent that, yes, smart contracts, automated, don't need that human intervention. But I'm going to say for your own protections, and I think it's a point Nicola made earlier, be proactive, not reactive. Don't use us. Don't use lawyers. And then when you get in a mess, you will come to us and cost you a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think the next question, yeah, give it to him.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Confidence, and I'm an IT support specialist. My question is around an issue that Mrs. Buki raised some time ago about committing crime in the metaverse. And my question is very straightforward. I want to ask, if the metaverse is truly just a virtual universe, like we have 3D games around, and we use the Oculus to, enter the metaverse, why should committing crime there, be an issue of great concern? I mean, we have some 3D games you can play where you shoot and keep people around, and it's just a game. So if the metaverse is just a virtual universe, why should committing crime there be an issue of great concern? Thank you.
All right, awesome question. The reason why is because, number one, the metaverse is not just a place. The metaverse is more of a space. Now, the reason why they call it a metaverse is because previously, when we had Second Life and other virtual worlds, if you earned money in Second Life, it stayed there, right? Unless you knew somebody else that was in Second Life, your money doesn't really mean anything, and it cannot translate into the real world. That was before. But now, if you are working in the metaverse, you will be earning cryptocurrency, and that cryptocurrency you can convert into USD in 30 seconds, 1 minute, depending. You can buy something in the metaverse and pay for it from funds that you have in the real world. So now what we have is not just a virtual world, we have a social economy, that people are actually living there, people are working there, people are renting their properties out in the metaverse, and they are earning in dollars. They earn in cryptocurrency and they convert it to US dollars. So this becomes pertinent. It's not just a virtual world anymore. It's a social economy. The only thing is that it has different layers. So, for instance, you can access it in 2D, you can access it in 3D via VR headsets or AR headsets, So it's quite different now from how it used to be, and that's what's special about the metaverse. So now, when a person commits crime in that space, they can actually move those funds into the real world. unlike previously where it will stay there, okay? And then again, if you've tried being in an immersive space, if somebody hits you, you will feel like the person really hits you. I mean, you at least step back. It will be like there will be an interaction. If you've tried a VR headset before, it's not like before that it was 2D and you couldn't really interact with the person. Now it's more immersive. So now all of these things begin to, play in the real world. The VR headset, it can measure your eye movement. It can tell your surroundings around you. If your light is off, it will tell you your light is off. You should switch your lights on. Do you understand? So things like this never used to happen before. So that's why the metaverse now is a space that you can't just get away with crime. It's not like a video game that you kill someone, Mortal Kombat, and then that's it. There's actually a real person on the other side. That's another thing. Then the last aspect is that there's also digital identity. So the ID that you have could be married to the ID you have in the physical world. So there's an issue there. We can't just ignore that. So regulation needs to come into play where, is it one user, one physical person for one virtual person, or whatever virtual person that I have or virtual people that I have now need to be registered or tracked. There has to be some kind of regulation because of all of these factors, that come into play. So it's very important.
Thank you very much, Madam Buki. Sorry, I know we have much more questions, but unfortunately, we've been informed that we've overstayed our welcome. So it's actually been a very pleasant session, and we really appreciate your listening and participation. Thank you very much, Nico and Sarah, for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Davison.
Thank you for having us. And we hope to see you in Dubai, all of you, at some point.
Definitely. Yes. And thank you, Mrs. Buki. Mr. Chita said no final words, so we draw the curtain at this point. Thank you.
Don't commit crime in the metaverse. That's my final.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A round of applause for them as they go. Remember, don't commit crime on the metaverse. That's the takeaway word. Lawyers can talk, eh? Jehovah. This is not courtroom, Oga. Argument. Hey. Thank you, Shay. They just want to find a way to put...